Hey guys, Bart coming to you from TST Industries today with another install episode. Today we're going to be covering the installation of our Elite-1 Fender Eliminator on a Yamaha FZ-09. Now when you go to check out the product page for this system, you will notice that the base component is the closeout that closes out the area left behind by the removal of the fender and provides a base to mount either one of the two choices that you'll be presented with for the license plate bracket. One of those choices will be the static standard steel version, and the other is the upgraded CNC machined aluminum anodized, nice sophisticated version that is just a little bit more money but enables you to adjust the license plate angle and looks really cool. The only difference between these two systems is the way they mount onto the closeout. So for the purpose of this video, we will only be mounting one of the systems onto the bike since they are identical in that fashion, and we will break apart the two procedures for how to mount each one of these onto the closeout. We'll start this installation by the removal of the OEM components that will need to come off the bike. Let's start that now. So in the first step, we'll be removing the license plate off the bike. We will retain the hardware that held the license plate on the original setup. We'll reuse that hardware for mounting the license plate onto the new TST Industries Fender Eliminator. Next, we will remove the seat. The lock is located here under the tail. Next, we will be removing the two push fasteners located on either side of the fender here. Press in the center, that unlocks it, and just pry up on it and it just pops out. You can immediately reset it into this position. That makes reinstallation really easy. All right, so now we can start undoing the tail components here. We will start with these two fasteners. 10mm socket will be the tool of choice for these. At this point, we'll have access to the next four fasteners we'll need to undo. These two 8mm heads holding this bracket to the subframe. And once all four of these come out, this bracket can just come out, and now we'll have access to the wiring here that needs to be unplugged. We will need to unplug these three connector sets that enable you the removal of the fender and all the electrical components on the fender. For the signal plugs, I like to use a small flathead screwdriver, pry up on the locking tab to release it. It makes it really easy to remove these male plugs. And for the license plate light, these are simple bullet connectors. You just pull them apart on axis and they just come off. So that your wiring's free, we can proceed to the removal of the next four 10mm head fasteners. These four nuts in this location will be the ones. On the last fastener, I'm going to make sure to support the fender assembly from the bottom with my hand so it doesn't just drop. Now the fender is completely loose, able to come out. I'll guide the wires so that they don't snag on anything, and just have to make sure to clear these features from the undertail here. All right, we'll put this to the side and go on to the next step. All right, so let's now pre-configure the kit that we're going to install on the bike. In the beginning, we're going to focus only on the standard static version, and later we'll show you how to do the adjustable upgraded version. So if you've chosen this kit, these are the hardware sets that you will be presented with, along with a closeout and the license plate bracket. So the longer countersunk screws, 2 of the nuts, and for the washers go to the side, and we'll only focus on these right now. We'll pre-configure this bracket onto the closeout, onto these holes on the closeout, like this, and using one small washer and one of these screws, fasten the bracket through the closeout, and on the other side it will receive the locking nylock nut. Once I get it hand tight, I will need to use a tool, but before that happens, I will just get both sides done. Make sure we get it in the right direction. The button head screws look nicer on the outside, so we left the nuts on the inside. Once again, finger tight, and then I'm going to grab a 4mm Allen and a 10mm box wrench, or open-ended rather. Get that open-ended wrench onto this nut, hold it in place as I turn this screw in. Now they do have a tendency to come out of the wrench, so I have to go a little bit at a time. Before I tighten it down completely, I'm going to make sure that it's centered on the closeout here. Alright, and do that to both sides. No need to use any thread locking agents on this because we've provided you with locking hardware. It is a little cumbersome because the nut on the back side has a tendency to slip out of the wrench. All right, and that's ready to go. I want to mention we've provided a hole through the closeout that enables you to channel license plate light wires through it in case you're mounting a license plate on with this kit, or signaling equipment. I do want to note that since you're removing the OEM fender from the bike, you are doing away with your stock signaling equipment and license plate light. It is highly recommended that you replace the license plate light, and you definitely need some sort of signaling equipment on your bike. So for that reason, we also make these pod signal kits that have LEDs in the capsules, 15 LEDs per side. Makes for a really nice signaling solution, and we provide those with all the mounting hardware so that you can mount them to the back of your license plate setup. Now we're also designing integrated taillight at the moment, and that will be available probably next year, so look for that later on. So now, if you're not using any wires going through the closeout, we also provide some hardware to close this out. Now I know some guys will want to do this and not have any equipment on there, so we provided that hardware just in case. So for this installation on this particular bike, I'm just going to showcase it with this configuration. I do highly recommend that you reinstall some sort of signaling components and license plate light. So now at this point, this would be ready to go back on the bike and get installed into the undertail, into the subframe. But since we're doing a multiple installation here, I'm going to show you guys how to construct the upgraded version of the system, and then we will install that on the bike. Again, whether you're installing the simple or the upgraded version, it's the same procedure from this point forward. So we'll just do that real quick and we'll hop on the bike. So if you've chosen to go with the upgraded Elite-1 Adjustable version, I will show you how to take these components and configure them into this system that will then mount onto the bike. So again, just like before, these fasteners here are responsible for mounting the entire thing to the bike. We'll put them to the side and use them later. Now, I'll put this off to the side, use it later as well. We'll mainly focus on constructing this into our hinged adjustable setup. So, I'm going to take the main bracket, arrange it like this. I'm going to take these brackets that are actually mirror image geometry of each other, and from the side they look like this. Now we'll arrange them in this fashion right behind this main bracket. Now I'll take the small countersunk screws and the small nuts with the flanges on them, arrange them like this, and now we will use the middle hole on either side of this bracket to insert this screw through, get the screw through the slot in this bracket, and thread on the nut. Now this is a nylock locking nut. We'll need a tool to tighten it up. Before we do that, I will repeat the procedure on the other side. And now we'll grab an 8mm box wrench. You could also use an open-ended. And then a 3mm Allen. Now we'll turn these screws in almost all the way. What we're looking for here is to preserve some adjustability. So now this is ready. Now we will focus on these components. As you can see, these hinge bosses, they swoop sort of. Geometry has curvature to it. So this is the trailing edge, this is the leading edge. Trailing edge has sort of a narrower geometry here, and that will be pointed towards the back of the bike this way. So it will be arranged like this. I'll show it to you from the side for simplicity. And both of these are identical. They get positioned the same exact way. We'll grab a washer and a screw from the leftover components and arrange the hinge boss. It's got a little protrusion, it's got a little boss part sticking out that actually fits into the hole in this little L bracket, and the screw goes through it. And for this particular screw, you'll need a 4mm Allen. Just get it in. Don't tighten it just yet. The procedure gets repeated on the other side. Now, one thing to remember in this step is to get these hinge bosses from the center of this assembly, so that when this is all pre-configured, you end up with it looking like this. Show it to you guys from the side. And this assembly essentially gets assembled onto the closeout with the remaining screws. All right, so now let's grab the remaining smaller screws. There are 2 of them, and insert them into these pockets, these bores on the non-cosmetic side of your closeout, and then arrange these components in a way that make the system end up looking like this, using a 4mm Allen. Turn those screws in, make sure to leave some adjustability. All right, so now we'll start tightening everything up, and I like to go little by little, just to make sure I don't cause any tension on any of the components, because then it won't adjust very easily. So you help yourself with a 10mm open-ended wrench on these hinge bosses to keep them oriented parallel to each other. That looks pretty good. So now I'm going to make sure that the main bracket is centered around the center axis of the system. And get that 8mm wrench and the 3mm Allen going again. I'm going to tighten these components up, ensuring that they're centered. Alright, so now really the last freedom of adjustability is in the hinge itself, and I will tighten that up once the system is on the bike and we have the license plate on it, so that I could pick my final license plate angle that I'm going to leave the bike with, and we'll tighten that down and it'll be good to go. Now, in the previous pre-assembly, showed you this hole basically blocked out with the provided hardware. For this installation, we'll show you the installation with our license plate light. This is a separate kit that is available as an option. Highly recommend it. Makes it really easy to install. We have a separate installation video for this license plate light for in-depth steps on how to do it. This video is not really the installation video for this part. I want to show it to you guys anyway, so that you know this is available to you should you choose to add it. Okay, so we will now place this on the bike and proceed with the reassembly of all the other components. So now we've jumped back onto the bike, and we're gonna take one of these longer countersunk screws and insert it through the cosmetic surface of your closeout, make it penetrate through here, and get one of the bigger washers on it. What I like to do for this part of the procedure is use a little bit of painter's tape and get this in place. Sort of acts like a extra hand. If you have a helper, you could probably just do this with a helper and have them hold the screws from the bottom. And do this on both sides. Now, this tape will temporarily hold our screws in place as we place this system on the bike. So we'll start by feeding the license plate light wire, or whatever wiring you're installing, along with the system through to the access window left behind by the fender wiring, and then we will spread these two components as we get all of these new components in, and we will have to find the rearmost screw holes on the subframe and line up our screws with those holes. Now we'll make sure that the bracket for the tail light that is now loose also lines up the holes in the back with new screws that we've just inserted in there. Use the remaining 2 washers that came with our kit. And now we'll grab the nylock locking nuts that came with the kit and thread them onto these screws. Like I said before, these are locking nuts, so you probably won't get them very far on with just your fingers. You want to make sure that they stay in place. All right, now we can jump underneath, remove the painter's tape. It'll allow us access to the screws, so we could fasten this in place, tighten it up, and move on. this point, I will tighten up the bolted connections between the closeout and the subframe. I'm using a 4mm Allen and a 10mm socket for this. Get them pretty snug, but still leave some adjustability so that I could center this system. The mounting holes in the closeout are actually slotted. It enables you to center your system. All right. I actually over tightened it a little bit on this side. I'm going to loosen it back up just a little bit. And then make sure that it's sitting center. And tighten it back down. All right. Now I can actually feed this wire in all the way to where it's gonna be and route it properly up top. This bike has some nice captive geometry for wiring here. We'll make use of all that stock captive geometry and then just plug it back in. On this particular setup, I've crimped on these connectors that match the bullet connectors. So I'll just make use of those. And I'm gonna test it quickly here. Make sure our light is operating. And it is, so we are good to proceed. Just finish up routing this. Normally, in most installations of this type, I would be routing some sort of extra wires for a signaling system here, plugging them into here. That is a separate installation, however, so we'll leave it at that here and start reassembling some of these components that we've removed on this bike. Start with this component here. So there are probably two ways to put it back in. One way is definitely wrong. What you want is the slot for the seat lock on the left of the bike, and you want this surface to remain horizontal. Find the screws that you've taken out of there. They are the 8mm head. Next, I will reinstall these screws that we took out of the rear here. They do have shoulders on them, so you have to make sure that you align the bodywork with that shoulder and you don't just clamp down on it. If you encounter any resistance while they're going back in, make sure you move this bodywork around and get the screw and the hole for the screw concentric. All right, so now we can preset the angle on our bracket. Now, I like to preset it and then finalize it once the license plate is on the bike. So I still leave just a smidge of adjustability here. And right. So these two push type fasteners that we've taken out in the very early steps now can actually go back in. And now we could grab our license plate and reinstall it on here. Now, as you can notice, on our particular light, we have a double-sided tape on the surface as meant to adhere to the back of your license plate. The license plate actually clamps the license plate light in place, and it's just an extra precaution should you choose to use it. I typically don't, because I like my system to be removable, and these license plate lights never really come off Never seen that happen. So I'll just leave it at that. Make sure that it's center, that it's hanging within the slots of the main bracket. Basically where I want it to be. You could yank on it, it'll come down, push it up, it'll go up. So you want to make sure that it's center level and up to your liking. And once that is done, we can finalize the angle of the license plate, and it has a lot of adjustability to it. It's really meant to be somewhere in this range. You bring it down here. Number one, you don't see the license plate. Number two, this is not very nice looking. So I typically like my license plate somewhere in this angle. I'm going to tighten down on both sides. You want to make sure that you use enough force. I'm going to lock these screws into place. You want to make sure they never vibrate out. I recommend blue Loctite or other thread locking agent that is not permanent. Now we can replace the seat. And now our job is done. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, concerns, comments, please place them below in the comment field. Other than that, we're done. Hope to see you next time.